Okay, so I'd like to introduce Gokhan. So he's a principal analyst with the telecom software research team at Analysys Mason, and he's a lead analyst for the cloud infrastructure strategies and the merge cloud networking research program. His research focuses on the building blocks, architectures, and the adaptation of the cloud-native, disaggregated, and open networks that underpin the delivery of 5G, merge cloud, and edge computing. It's very similar to our work. And so please welcome to the Gokhan for the presentation. Yeah, so please ask your question.
Would you prefer? Is it all right? Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me okay? Practice. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gokhan, I'm principal analyst from Analysys Mason. And today I'm going to talk about this network cloudification journey and where we are, in terms of the progress the industry has made and what are the challenges and what's going to be next. You could just move to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our study called Cloud Transformation Benchmark. It's a study we do with telecom operators. It's a primary research. We have deep dive interviews with the telecom operators, and we basically measure the cloud native readiness of operators in terms of their technological maturity and organizational maturity. And we did the first version of this study 2 years ago, and right now we are doing an update on it. And today I'm sharing the preliminary results. So it's the first time actually we are seeing this and someone is talking about it in public. So as I said, we are trying to measure the cloud nativeness and what does cloud native mean, right? I mean, there is no standard definition for what cloud native is. So basically, we talk about the decomposed microservices-based network functions that are, could be deployed in containers or virtual machines, but managed by a Kubernetes environment. So this is pretty much, the basic definition, right? But for telco network, it's more than just these, right? It's about having a highly automated and programmable networks and operations. So you have closed-loop automation in day 0, 1, and 2 operations. You need to have CI/CD DevOps, especially like multi-vendor CI/CD chains. So it's much more about technology. It's also the operations and organizational change that cloud native brings. So having said these, there's a background for cloud nativeness. When we look at the results, the first thing that jumps out of it is that there's no operator is truly cloud native today. We've got 2 operators that are quite being close to being cloud native, and we call them here cloud native visionaries. But also now that we are doing an update, and we see that these 2 operators actually flew too high and too fast. So now they are having troubles in terms of their transformation. But when we look at the majority of the markets, they're pretty much clustered in the middle, especially the European operators. They are clustered in what we call cautious adopters group. And we call them cautious adopters because they understand the benefits of cloud native, but they are not convinced that the market and the vendor ecosystem is mature enough. So they're holding back on making large, big investments in cloud native yet. And this was 2 years ago. But today, when we look at it, actually, these European operators, they started to make some progress, especially from the operational and organizational maturity point of view. So they're executing organization-wide digital transformation and cloud-native transformation initiatives. They're investing a lot in cloud-native reskilling and upskilling, and also they're getting much more support from their C-level executives and other organizational units as well. So it's not just about the networks. And they're also making some progress technically as well, some small-scale 5G SA core deployments, and some visionaries, they're also doing cloudification of RAN. But overall, still kind of in the middle. And if you look at it, it's really the technological maturity that is lagging behind, and there's kind of a blame game going on between vendors and operators. Vendors are saying operators are not ready, and operators are saying, no, vendors, you are not ready, you are not cloud native. But what we are seeing here is that actually operators are meeting their end of the promise. They are investing a lot in organizational and operational transformation, and they're they're progressing. But when we look at the vendor solution, we are still seeing, monolithic VNFs, VNF managers, and it's not really, they're making a fast progress. But it's not only vendors' fault, because we are also hearing from operators and vendors as well, is that the 3GPP standards was also an issue. Even though, the 5G was conceived as a cloud-native environment, some operators and vendors are saying it was just a renamed, right? I mean, they didn't really make massive changes in terms of the approach to cloud nativeness, and also there are some issues, like for instance, stateless is a very difficult thing to do because of these standards. So after all, this is where we are today, and by the way, this study is still ongoing, so if you're interested in participating, please let me know. I can share information with you on how to do it. Next slide, please. Great. So CTV gives a snapshot of today, but let's have a look at the whole journey, right? And it's been a long and painful journey towards, the network cloudification. And we are seeing that last year, the network cloud has reached only 20% of its total addressable market. And what we mean by total addressable market is the network, the parts of the network that can be cloudified. So only 20% of what can be cloudified in the mobile network, this is mobile network only, is only cloudified by 20% by last year. And the cloud-native networks are still a small portion of it, so it was around 3% by the end of 2022. But we are forecasting that network cloudification is going to reach around 43% over the next 4 or 5 years, and the cloud-native networks are going to be the main driver for that, and the cloud-native networks are going to reach 28% by that time. So of course, I mean, this is going to rely on many important milestones. For instance, the 5G SA core adoption is going to be a critical success factor. But we are hearing from operators that there are some commercial concerns around 5G SA core, whether there's a business case or not. But also technology-wise, operators still not fully convinced that the functions are fully cloud-native. And RAN is also coming into picture. It's pretty much the last bastion of physical network functions in the mobile network. And but slowly the RAN is becoming cloudified, but there are many issues around it as well in terms of performance and latency, and also when you try to do Open RAN, for instance, lots of integration complexities and ecosystem maturities is a big issue. But we believe that we still maintain a positive outlook for these markets because simply there is no turning back now. There's no alternative to cloud-native transformation, to network cloudification, if operators want to, to maximize their 5G potential and also to be prepared for what's going to come next, which is going to be the 6G. Next slide, please. So as this transformation is going on, operators are also changing their the procurement models, and they are taking multiple different paths to building cloud-native networks. So traditionally, operators, they were procuring the network clouds in a vertically integrated model from network equipment providers. So it's pretty much, the single vendor stack, including the cloud, network functions, in some cases hardware. And it is still, in terms of spending, it accounts for more than half of spending. But we've seen a significant shift from these vertically integrated models to disaggregated network cloud models. And this is still, good amount of spending, but especially the smaller operators and also the ones from emerging markets, they still prefer vertically integrated because for them, disaggregation is too complex and too expensive, and they simply don't have the resources to do that. But it's going to be quite interesting what's going to happen with Nokia and the Red Hat partnership, so we are going to see what's going to be quite interesting. And the main disaggregated model, we call it the do-it-yourself private cloud, so DIY private cloud. And this is basically operators, they define a network cloud by themselves from scratch, and they procure components of it from different vendors, and they're responsible for stitching them together. And so there are some examples of it, and you guys, are in this room as well. And this has been it offers the maximum control and the potential for differentiation, but it also involves a lot of risks and complexities, right? I mean, these operators, they invested a lot in multiple vendors and system integrators, and they ended up reinventing the wheel so many times. And also, there are still some issues around automation, orchestration, and interoperability, and it's quite a complex path to take. So just look at AT&T, I mean, they gave up, the airship. So it's going to be interesting how this model is going to evolve, and of course the Project Silva could be an option to move this model forwards, but again, we're going to see. And final model is, the public cloud providers, they had a very strong entry to market. They signed up some big, large tier 1 customers, and their value proposition is quite clear, right? They understand very well the data center infrastructure and the cloud infrastructure, and also they have a very strong automation proposition. But of course, it comes with some issues. We position PCP cloud somewhere in between vertically integrated and DIY, because it's not as open, because most PCPs, they have a very opinionated the cloud infrastructure and automation approach, and also lots of issues around data sovereignty, especially for European operators. So it's basically, there's no one-size-fits-all approach here, and operators, they're going to take multiple paths, and even in some cases, they're going to do them at the same time, so concurrently, adopting these strategies. Next slide, please. And as this transformation of networks and also the vendor ecosystems is going on, operators are rethinking their approach to automation as well. And they kind of stand at crossroads at the moment. Some operators, they're thinking they want to continue with manual-based approach to network cloud automation, but some of their operators, they want a new, a fresh approach. They want something new that is basically based on cloud-native technology, so it is cloud-native from ground up and based on the open source technologies. I mean, of course, the manual has defined an era of automation, and it's lots of solutions that are based on manual, and the networks are going to stay hybrid for a long time. So it's perfect, fine approach for many operators. But some others, especially the advanced operators we talked to in the CTB study, they say that manual didn't go far enough and fast enough. So they're looking at some alternative approaches. If you could move to the next slide, please. So right now we are doing a research report on what this new cloud-native automation framework and the paradigm is going to look like. And what we are hearing from advanced operators and the pioneering vendors for this approach is that they want automation that comes from bottom up. So it basically puts the inherent automation capabilities of Kubernetes and its extension and its open source ecosystem. So Kubernetes resource module, the configuration as data, GitOps, and observability. So basically, they want an automation that comes from bottom up, not the top-down approach with the centralized and heavy function weights, centralized orchestrators. And also, they want to move to more declarative and model-driven approach, because most of the automation today is imperative and script-based. And the key idea here with the bottom layer is that also operators want to converge the operations of cloud infrastructure and the network functions, because today they are managed separately. And the beauty of cloud-native tools is that you can automate it doesn't matter, right? If it is the network function, if it is the infrastructure, or if it's the cloud resources, you can use the same tools and methodologies to automate these environments. So we believe that this bottom layer is going to be open source, standardized, and there are some initiatives like Nephew, for example, is driving this. And if you've seen the Cloud Native Manifesto from the Next Generation Mobile Networks group in GMN, they make lots of reference to how the automation should look like using Kubernetes tools. But we are not dealing with an IT kind of environment, right? If it was all IT, the bottom layer would be fine. But in a critical infrastructure like the telco networks, you need something that oversees and enhances Kubernetes, because Kubernetes does lots of self-healing and self-scaling, but Telco Cloud is complex. You have lots of dependencies, constraints, and policies. So we believe that there's going to be a higher order that's going to manage this open source standardized layer, and it's going to be, again, so really much more control and oversee rather than being a highly centralized domain. And this is going to be where the vendors are trying to differentiate themselves, because the bottom layer is pretty much open source, but there is not much definition and standardization for the top layer, and that's going to lead to fragmentation. So potentially, this is an opportunity for ETSI to look at how this open source based cloud native automation can be standardized using this new layer that's going to emerge. So this is, again, it's a work in progress for us right now, so if you have any questions or any ideas, I'll be more than happy to discuss this with you. But yeah, that's all I wanted to share with you today. So thank you.
So any short questions? Okay, thank you, Goken.